My week one reactions and the studs for week one coming right up. What is up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast. Today is Sunday, September 13th, 2020, and of course, I am Chip, I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find our podcast on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. So guys, week one is almost in the books. I just got done watching the Sunday night football game, and a lot of stuff going on this week. On this episode, I'm going to go over all the matchups and all the my reactions to all the games. But first, let's get into the news. And right now, there's a few injury updates. Le'Veon Bell today had left the game with a hamstring injury. He really didn't do a lot. He rushed the ball for 6 times for 14 yards, and just like last year, just the things that we were kind of expecting out of the Jets offense, very lackluster. Didn't really do a lot, but he left the game with a hamstring injury. So something to monitor going throughout the week, and seeing what the practice reports will kind of report this week with Le'Veon Bell. But it looks like he could be at risk of not playing in week 2. So just adjust, pivot, and try to find out find somebody who can plug in to take his spot. And then Eagles running back Boston Scott, he left the game I think around the third quarter or so. He had a somewhat of a lower leg injury, but the team did not disclose the injury. And then he came back into the game. So if he does miss any time, Corey Clement is the guy that you want to pick up. Obviously, Miles Sanders, he should be back by week 2, but just in case Miles Sanders cannot go, grab Corey Clement if he's not already taken. But just something to monitor because obviously with Miles Sanders being out, Boston Scott was the guy who was supposed to be the lead back, and then he ended up getting hurt. And then Corey Clement really didn't do a lot today, but it's just something to monitor and to see if Miles Sanders does not come back this week or in week 2, then pick up Corey Clement. And then this one was kind of a frustrating thing. Bucks wide receiver Mike Evans did play today. Just one of those things that he was up and down with the injury report. And if you played him, you got a touchdown out of him. You got 1 reception for a touchdown, and it probably didn't do much to your fantasy lineup. You probably benched him. I was benching him in my fantasy league just because I didn't want to chance it. And throughout the whole entire game, it looked like the right decision. And he did have that 1 touchdown late in the fourth quarter, but it really probably didn't hurt you if you did bench him. But just one of those things where it did. If you listen to or watched the video the other day that I posted about the injury updates, that I wasn't playing Mike Evans. I felt like with Mike Evans not playing, it would give Gronk a uptick in targets. Gronk did not look good at it as well. He kind of had just kind of some missed opportunities. O.J. Howard had the touchdown as well, so very hard to kind of determine how that's going to play out. But the thing is, Mike Evans played, so obviously that took away some of the targets that I would expect Gronk or O.J. Howard or someone else to get. But with that being the case, I mean, those are the things that you risk when you try to figure out the injuries and everything like that when it comes to players and if they're going to be active or not. And then in Indianapolis, Marlon Mack was carted off the field with an ankle injury. It seems to be an Achilles. It looks like it's going to be a season-ending injury. So something to monitor. I mean, obviously Jonathan Taylor came in and took over the lead back role, but very surprised on how much Nyheim Hines was actually playing and how much involvement he had with the game plan this week. He had a great game, rushing and receiving, but he's going to be one of those guys you're going to target on the waiver wire because Hines probably was not drafted in any of your leagues. So you're going to go ahead and try to pick him up on the waiver wire this week. I'm going to do a waiver wire show that's going to be dropping on Tuesday. So he will be part of that show and the discussion. But looks like Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines are going to be part of that 1-2 punch in Indianapolis. And then on Sunday night, Blake Jarwin injured his knee early reports are indicating that he has a torn ACL. He's going to do an MRI on Monday to confirm that. It was a non-contact injury. If you watch the replay, he was running his route, planted, turned, and then he grabbed the back of his knee. So with that being the case, that's just generally how ACL injuries happen. I mean, over 70% of ACL injuries are non-contact. It just takes the right plant, twist, and turn, and it pops the ACL. So, it's unfortunate because Blake Jarwin was one of those guys that was noted to be one of those breakout tight ends this year for the Cowboys offense, but it looks like he's going to be lost for the season. So it's unfortunate. You hate seeing guys that have so much upside for the season get injured. So hopefully he has a full recovery and it comes back strong next year. But that's all it for the news for today. And honestly, I'm kind of excited about this next segment because I really think that this type of stuff gets kind of unseen in a sense. But I want to add on my weekly reactions. I want to add some different flair to the podcast. I like seeing who the top performers are for week one, right? Not just the people who are the studs, but overall in the NFL, because I think it's cool stats, right? So, I'm a sports science major, so I like these type of things. So, this is based off of next gen stats, but the top performers for week one, the fastest ball carry for week one was Raheem Mostert, right? He had a 75-yard TD reception that he ran at a total of 22.73 miles per hour. Now, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I think they were saying that was like the fastest ball carrier since like 2018. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, to get the 22.73 miles per hour is an insane stat. So I thought that's always a very interesting thing to share, because I think, when we think of fantasy football, we think about what are the offensive players doing. And yeah, right, obviously Raheem Mostert is a awesome offensive player, but I like seeing, other guys get some of the limelight as well. So the fastest sack of today was by Josh Sweat of the Philadelphia Eagles. He had a sack for 2.3 seconds. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that's in a blink of an eye, the guy got a sack, and I think that's a cool thing to be able to sack the quarterback that quickly at 2.3 seconds. And then going back to the longest play of the day was, belongs to Raheem Mostert. So he, on his 75-yard reception, he actually ran a total of 91.4 yards, which maybe you're like, how's that even possible? But it's not just, obviously he had a 75-yard TD reception, but he had to go across the field to do that. So obviously that adds yards. So Next Gen Stats adds those yards to it. So he ran a total of 91.4 yards on that same reception, which is crazy to me. To be able to run that many yards and still maintain a 22.73 mile per hour run is crazy. And then with the next stat I thought was pretty interesting is the improbable completions, right? So Next Gen Stats does all this algorithm and statistics for how low the percentage is to complete a pass. And today that belongs to Aaron Rodgers. When you threw a ball to Devontae Adams, the completion probability was 14.3%. And this was on his 40-yard reception. So, that's a pretty crazy stat. I mean, obviously throughout the year we're going to see passes that are in the single digits. So it's just crazy on how these elite athletes can make catches that seems like it's impossible to catch, but they tend to be able to make those catches because they're so freakishly athletic. So I just think those are some pretty cool stats to share. I'm going to share those stats every week, and I think just a cool little nugget for fantasy football and just for football knowledge on particular stats. So with that being the case, I'm going to go right into my week one reactions. And the first game I'm going to react to is the Seahawks versus the Falcons. The Seahawks won easily 38-25. Russell Wilson had a great game. Matt Ryan had a decent game as well. It's one of those. The Seattle Seahawks are the home team for where I live. I live in Seattle, in the Seattle area, and it was on TV and I was watching it because it was on right before the Bucs game. And Russell Wilson, I mean, man, he always looks good. He always starts the season very strong, just like he did last year. I just hope he's able to maintain that for fantasy purposes. I mean, he has not had an MVP vote in his entire career, not even one single vote. And hopefully this is a year that he's able to be able to get some type of MVP knowledge or acknowledgement, because, the guy is a very good quarterback, and I don't think really gets the respect that people like he deserves. I mean, he's very underrated, I believe. But Russell Wilson had a great game. DK Metcalf had a good game. He had a couple bad drops in the game, but he had a very good touchdown reception from Russell Wilson in the game. And then Calvin Ridley had a great game. He had 2 touchdowns today. And then Julio Jones, he had a decent game as well, but didn't come out with any touchdowns or anything like that. So, but overall, I mean, the Seahawks look good. The Falcons just didn't look like they were able to compete. Obviously Chris Carson had a massive game. He had 2 touchdowns and ran the ball well. Carlos Hyde was involved. He ran the ball pretty well. But overall, I mean, the Seahawks looked like they were very well prepared. And looks like they obviously are looking forward to next week and just trying to maintain that momentum going into next week. And then the next game is the New York Jets versus the Bills. The Bills won 27-17. Big game by Josh Allen. I mean, he was looking not unstoppable today. John Brown had a very good game. He was one of those guys I put in my boom bust categories this week because he's a guy that him and Josh Allen have a chemistry, and with Stephon Diggs being the new receiver, I mean, he had a decent game as well, but John Brown's the one who came out on top today with the wide receivers in Buffalo. But Zach Moss, he had a good debut. He had a touchdown today. He looked like the better back. Devin Singletary did have his snaps that he got, but I felt like Zach Moss had a very, very good game, and I can see why that people are worried about Devin Singletary losing his job, because Zach Moss looks like a guy who can run in between the tackles. He can he can obviously catch the ball. And he's just a bigger back. So I think that with that being the case, I mean, Zach Moss might be a guy that I'm continuing to have on my radar going forward this season. And then on the New York Jets side, not much to talk about. The only thing that was good coming out of the New York Jets side of the ball was Jameson Crowder. He had a massive game, over 100 yards receiving, had a touchdown, had a very long touchdown. Like I mentioned before in the beginning of the podcast, Le'Veon Bell left the game with a hamstring injury. Just same old with the Jets. Chris Herndon didn't have a very good game. So Sam Darnold didn't really, other than the long pass to Jameson Crowder, it kind of had to be a bad game as well. But this is what we see with the Jets. I mean, hopefully they're able to turn on. Hopefully with a few more games, they're able to get some consistency and momentum on their offensive side of the ball. But it just didn't really have a good game overall. Going to the Las Vegas Raiders and the Carolina Panthers. The Raiders won 34-30. A very good win on the road for the Raiders. Josh Jacobs looked unstoppable today. I mean, this is a guy that I had as one of my must-have running backs this year. He just looked fantastic, and he was involved in the passing game. He had 6 targets. He had 4 receptions. This is one of the things that we are talked about. Like, Josh Jacobs can be a top 5 running back if they involved him in the passing game. He was on the field majority of the time. He got the receptions, he got the yardage on the ground, and he had the 3 touchdowns. Good game by Josh Jacobs, and I look forward to kind of seeing what he does, throughout the season and as he gets more involved in the passing game. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey, not much to talk about there. Stud, had a great game. Robbie Anderson, he led the game in receiving for the Panthers. He had he really came off on one play for a 75-yard touchdown that he got from Teddy Bridgewater. But, this is one of those things where we didn't really know what the Panthers offense was going to look like. DJ Moore had to, kind of struggle a little bit, so open up some opportunities for Robbie Anderson. He's a guy that could be a target for your waiver wires this week, depending on the league, depending on who's available. But overall, good win by the Las Vegas Raiders. And then going on to the Chicago Bears versus the Lions. The Bears came out on top 27-23. Mitch Trubisky had a decent game. He had 3 touchdowns. I mean, he was a QB1 this week. I mean, this is what you get out of Mitch Trubisky. He doesn't start the game off very, very well, and then comes around and throws 3 touchdowns. I mean, he's a guy that he had a very crucial touchdown to Anthony Miller today later in the game to kind of win the game for them and seal the game for them, because I don't know if anybody watched the game. If you're a Lions fan, I'm sorry, but like. Obviously the Bears went down the field and scored with Anthony Miller's touchdown, and then DeAndre Swift, man, he just completely dropped the ball in the end zone. Would have won the game for him. Obviously, it would have made his fantasy day and his debut a lot better, but unfortunately, he had a wide open pass that he just dropped in the end zone, and I hope that he's going to be able to get past that. But what was a very interesting nugget about this game is that Adrian Peterson, I mean. He led the team with carries, and he led the team in yards. And you wouldn't think that. You would think that with Kerryon Johnson there and drafting DeAndre Swift, that they're going to be more involved in the rushing game. And Peterson led the team with 93 yards. So, like, it's a very hard thing to try to predict this backfield right now, because if they're going to continue to involve Adrian Peterson like this, I mean, it's definitely going to limit the upside for DeAndre Swift and even Kerryon Johnson. So something to look after in the sense of what's going on in the next couple weeks. But hopefully Peterson, doesn't take too much value out of DeAndre Swift. And then going on to the Colts and the Jags. The Colts lost this one 27-20. It was a great game overall by the Jags. I mean, they got down early. They were able to fight back, make some defensive stops, turn the ball over, and they were able to win. But, good fantasy outing for Gardner Minshew. Like, he had 3 touchdowns today, and, he was a guy that I fell in love with in the offseason. Like, I was looking at some of the guys who could break out, and Gardner Minshew is one of those guys that I think has a very favorable schedule going forward. Now, he may not be able to play him every week, but he's a guy that you can target and stream on favorable matchups. And, I didn't think the Jags were going to have a very good game today, just because of the defense for the Colts is improved. They have a really stout defensive line, so I was really nervous about playing James Robinson. So I benched James Robinson because I needed Miles Sanders went out for me this week, so I had a choice of playing James Robinson, Anthony Miller, or Alan Lazard. I made the choice of playing Anthony Miller, and I was upset with that choice until at the very end of the game where he got that touchdown by Mitch Trubisky. But one of those things where DJ Chark had a touchdown, Safalt Jr. had, the other receiver for the Jags had a touchdown. I mean, like I said, I think the Jags have favorable matchups going forward. So I don't think it's a guy that Gardner Minshew's not a guy you can start every single week, but he showed today that he can get the job done. So hopefully that continues for him, because I really like him this year. And then also I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Nyheim Hines had a surprising 2 touchdowns today. Wasn't really expecting that. I was expecting more of Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. And obviously Marlon Mack went out with the injury. So it's going to be very interesting how the Colts kind of play this backfield. But Paris Campbell had a good game. He led all the receiving with 9 targets. Obviously he tied it with T.Y. Hilton as well. But Paris Campbell's a guy that you could look for in your waiver wire if you need wide receiver help. But like I said earlier, we don't know exactly what's happening with Marlon Mack. It looks like he's going to be out for the rest of the season. But, it's one of those things where you have to unfortunately got to pivot. And more than likely, you probably had Marlon Mack as a backup anyway, so you might not be missing out much. But it just sucks seeing guys get hurt on the first game of the season. And then when it comes to James Robinson, because a lot of questions came around about James Robinson on how he was going to play his workload. They were saying that he was going to be the starter, but you don't really know, like, if that's just coach talk, if that's really actually going to happen. And then, honestly, he had 16 carries. So he had 16 carries for 62 yards. So, like, he obviously is the lead back in Jacksonville. He had a decent outing for being a guy that no one knew about, going against a defensive line like the Colts. He had 10 fantasy points if you're going to play in the PPR league. So, I think that he's a comfortable guy to going forward. If you need a flex play, I think that there will be better matchups for him going forward. So if you're able to grab James Robinson, great. Aaron Rodgers had 4 touchdown passes. I mean, I know that I was joking a little bit about in the offseason about the wide receivers that they have, but it looks like he has a pretty good trio of receivers there. I mean, Devontae Adams had a monster game today. He had 17 targets. I mean, the guy was insane today. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, he had a touchdown as well, a long touchdown. He dropped a couple passes, but he had a good fantasy outing. Even Alan Lazard had a touchdown and a good fantasy outing. So, I mean, I don't know. Aaron Rodgers looked good, and I think that this offense can be very lethal if they're able to play like they played today. But I don't know. It's one of those things where, that offense really didn't click much last year, and now we see kind of what they're like today. And they could have a very good offensive season. Now, on the other side of the ball with the Minnesota Vikings, Adam Thielen had a great game. Kirk Cousins looked all right. Dalvin Cook, he had 2 touchdowns early in the game. He only had 12 carries, though, so they didn't really run the ball much today. So it was really interesting to kind of see, they were, obviously playing from behind a lot. But, I would like to see Dalvin Cook, more involved. But as the game got out of reach, Alexander Madison took over, and he had a decent outing. He had 12 fantasy PPR points today. So not bad for a guy with limited snaps. But it's just one of those things where, when you want to see the Vikings be in the game, because that means more opportunities for Dalvin Cook. He didn't hurt you today. Obviously, he scored 20, I think around 21 fantasy points today. So if you're playing in a PPR league, so it wasn't a bad game at all. It was just one of those things where you wish that he was able to play more just based on the game being a little bit closer. But I think nothing to worry about with Dalvin Cook going forward. And then going to the Dolphins versus the Patriots. I mean, this was an ugly game. I mean, for the Dolphins at least. I mean, the Patriots won 21-11. Cam Newton looked good. I mean, everyone's concerned about his foot and his shoulder. And honestly, I mean, he had 75 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he was the only bright spot I felt like was on the Patriots, and he took the game over, and now it didn't help that Fitzpatrick had 3 interceptions. I mean, Fitzpatrick is going to lose his job pretty soon if he does not clean that stuff up. I mean, people are going to be waiting for Tua to get in there, and I hope that Fitzpatrick has a better outing next week, but it didn't help when he lost Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker went out early in the game with a hamstring injury, which left, obviously Preston Williams and then Mike Gesicki. Now Preston Williams did lead the team with 7 targets, so he's kind of starting off like he did last year. He led the team in targets in the beginning of last season before he got hurt. Today he led the team in targets as well. So, I still like Preston Williams. It wasn't a good matchup. He got Stephon Gilmore once Parker went out, and he did have a really crappy fantasy outing today, but you're not playing him unless you play him in deep. I had to play him today in my league because we play 3 wide receivers, so I plugged him in, thinking that the upside would be there, but unfortunately it didn't play out for me that well today, but I still have faith with him going forward. Now going to the Ravens versus the Cleveland Browns. The Ravens blew out the Browns 38-6. I mean, the Ravens, just like the Chiefs, look like they're in midseason form. I mean, the Ravens look great. Lamar Jackson looked great. Mark Andrews looked great. Marquise Brown looked great. I mean, they're just clicking today, and I don't know, man. I mean, I had Marquise Brown as one of my favorite players going into this year. I didn't get any shares of him this year in my league, in any leagues I'm in, which I'm very disappointed about. But he led the team with 5 targets, but 5 receptions for 101 yards is a good outing for Marquise Brown. It was kind of a quiet thing too, because unless you were watching the game, you didn't really hear much about Brown. And if he's somehow sitting on your waiver wire, I would grab him because he's a guy that I think is going to have a very good season. J.K. Dobbins had 2 touchdowns. This is another thing like I get frustrated with a lot of the news that comes out, because he apparently was 4th on the depth chart. And then you look at what happened today is that after Mark Ingram was playing, obviously J.K. Dobbins was the next guy in line, and he scored the touchdown. So I just think that's what's going to be. I think J.K. Dobbins is a very good player going forward. I think that if you need a flex play, he's a good option because they play in a run-heavy offense, and I think that you should get some good points out of him, week in and week out. Going to the Browns, I mean, Baker Mayfield, man, he looked bad today, and I want to say it was the Ravens defense. I mean, the Ravens always have a tough defense. It's a division rival. I always feel like division games are very hard based on they just know a lot of your tendencies. They have more film on you in a sense. They just know more about the teams that they play twice a year. And he just looked bad, and he just could not get anything going. OBJ, even though he had 10 targets, he had a very bad game as well. I'm concerned for Nick Chubb because Kareem Hunt led the team in carries. He led the team, like the running backs, in targets. This is why I was off of him. I was faded him so much after hearing some of the news that they were going to try to equal the amount of carries for Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And then Nick Chubb fumbled too. So like, if you have Nick Chubb, I mean, I hope that it turns around. I know it's only week 1. I'm not going to overreact because I don't want to do that for just 1 week of seeing how the game played out. But they gave Kareem Hunt an extension this week, and they used him heavily in this game. So I don't know. I think that this is going to be a running back by committee, and I think that they'll continue to play the hot hand. And Kareem Hunt today was the one who led the team in carries. And now in week 2 that could be different, but just something to just be a little concerned about going forward. Now going to the Eagles versus the Reds, to the Washington football team. The Washington won 27-17. They were down 17-0 in the beginning of the game. Carson Wentz looked great. He hit Zach Ertz for an early touchdown. But after that, I mean, he had a very tough outing. He was sacked 8 times today. Lance Johnson didn't play. He was a late scratch. And, you got to give credit to the Washington defense. I mean, they looked good. They like I said, got 8 sacks. They made plays. They didn't give up. There was one of those things where it's hard to overcome a 17-point deficit, and they did. But, it's one of those things where it's the first week of the season. The Eagles had, a couple of big plays from Jalen Reagor. Obviously, Dallas, Goedert had a great game. He led the team in targets. He led the team. He was the number 1 tight end for the week overall in the NFL. He had 109. He led the team with 9 targets, had 100 yards and a touchdown. And Zach Ertz, he still had a touchdown, but I just feel like this was my concern on why I was ranking Ertz a little lower on my rankings this year, because I feel like Dallas Goedert is going to be the guy who emerges, and Zach Ertz will be the guy who now will be the second tight end in Philadelphia. But I still like Ertz, but I just feel like he's just not going to be the same elite tight end that we are used to seeing. So going forward with the Chargers versus the Bengals, close game. Chargers were able to win based on a missed field goal at the very end of the game. The Chargers won 16-13. Like I said, it was decided by a late field goal miss by the kicker for the Cincinnati Bengals. It looked like he cramped up, or he pulled a hamstring or pulled a calf muscle. But it's unfortunate because Joe Burrow's, I mean, he looked pretty good going, for his first game as a pro. I mean, he had a really good rushing touchdown earlier in the game in the first quarter. And then, he didn't really do much, throughout the whole entire game until, late in the fourth quarter. He was driving the ball down the field. He was making all the right decisions. He hit AJ Green in the end zone with a touchdown, but it was called back on offensive pass interference. But he got them close enough to put them in a position to tie the game, and then the game ended on a missed field goal that and the Bengals lost. So it's a heartbreaking loss. But like I said, AJ Green, I mean, he looked good. He had, like I said, Joe Burrow earlier in the game, he missed a wide open AJ Green, and then AJ Green could have had 2 touchdowns this game. But it's one of those things where hopefully AJ Green can stay healthy, because that's gonna be a huge help for Joe Burrow. And then Joe Mixon, he didn't really have a good game. He had 19 carries for 69 yards. Couldn't really get anything going, but the fact that he had the workload. So hopefully in time, Joe Mixon will get the stats that we're looking for. And now back, going to the Charger side of the ball, very weird game with Austin Eckler. I mean, he had a lot of carries, but he only had 1 target and 1 reception, and it came like late in the game. And it's just weird. This was something I was concerned about with Tyrod Taylor being the new quarterback, is that Phillip Rivers knows how to check down. If you look at what happened to Hines today in the Colts game, Phillip Rivers knows how to check down to these running backs, and I think Tyrod Taylor just plays a different style of football. And Austin Eckler, I mean, that I don't want to hit the panic button, but like, to get 1 target and 1 reception is a little concerning. And on top of that, they really used Joshua Kelly a lot. I mean, he had 12 carries and a touchdown. So not saying that that's going to be like that every single week, but Josh Kelly looked pretty good. And I think, it's just one of those things to monitor, because everyone drafted Austin Eckler as the top 10 running back or top 12 running back. And I hope that he gets more involved in the pass game and that doesn't change based on a different quarterback. And now going to the heartbreaking loss, the Bucks versus the Saints. The Saints won 34-23. Big game by Alvin Kamara. He almost had 3 touchdowns. He had 1 called back, the last play of the fourth quarter because of stepping out of bounds. But it's a game that I was excited about. I didn't think the Bucks were going to win today. I thought that they were going to have a close game at least, but I just felt like the Saints are the overall better team. They have a better defense, and Drew Brees didn't really have a good game. We were able to stop Alvin Kamara on the ground. I mean, the Saints only averaged 2.4 yards rushing today, so I'm not really mad about that. It's just we had a bonehead play where there was a punt or no, I'm sorry, they tried to do a kind of a squib kick or whatever, and there was miscommunication with the receiver that was trying to catch the ball, and it caused a fumble, and they got the ball back. And Tom Brady had a pick 6, just bad mistakes. And like I mentioned earlier, Mike Evans had a really bad game. He only had the 1 touchdown and the 1 reception that came late in the fourth quarter. Ronald Jones didn't look too bad. Leonard Fournette didn't look really good. He didn't look good at all. He had 5 carries for 5 yards, which you expect a guy of that talent to not be only gaining 1 yard per carry. Like I said, Gronk didn't have a good game. O.J. Howard had a touchdown. But overall, Michael Thomas had a really just quiet game. But overall, I mean, I think that the thing to look at is Kamara. He got his extension and he had a good game. So if you're an owner of Kamara, you're happy about his outing and his usage. I mean, he's a guy that was heavily involved in the offense and whatnot. So, I think that if you're an owner of Tom Brady, I think you can feel comfortable going forward. I mean, he did end the week as the 12th quarterback of. I mean, we're still waiting for the stats for tomorrow night when it comes to the games that we have going on. But as of right now, he sits there at number 12 for the week. But yeah. So going on to the Cardinals versus the 49ers. The Cardinals had a pretty good game. They won 24-20. Obviously it's a great win for a team that's trying to find their identity, try to figure out where they're at, if they're going to take that step forward going into year 2 under the new coach and with Kyler Murray. And I think that Kyler Murray had a pretty good game overall. I mean, he had 2 total touchdowns. He had 1 rushing, 1 passing. DeAndre Hopkins looked like a monster. I mean, he had 14 receptions for 151 yards on 16 targets. So, he's that guy that Deshaun Watson wish he had again. It's just one of those things where DeAndre Hopkins is going to make Kyler Murray better, and I think that's going to what helps that offense. Kenyon Drake did not have a good game. Just interesting to kind of see like how the fantasy world kind of played out in this game. Raheem Mostert, like I said earlier in the podcast, he had a 75-yard touchdown. He looked good overall. He was obviously the clear back today. He had 15 carries. George Kittle had a very quiet game. He didn't really do anything much in the second half. He only had 4 receptions for 44 yards. He left the game early with a hyperextended knee. It was questionable if he was going to come back into the game. He actually returned, so not really sure the extent of the injury, but obviously he came back to play, so he should be ready to go for week 2. But just something to monitor because you never know how things feel the day after the game. But just be aware of what can go on during the practices later on in the week. Now going to the Sunday night game against the Cowboys and Rams. The Rams were able to win 20-17. It's a very run-heavy game. Both sides of the ball ran the ball a lot. I mean, the Rams controlled the clock. They ran the ball 40 times. And, Malcolm Brown looked great. He was obviously the lead back. Cam Akers, the rookie, he was, he sprinkled in there as well, along with Henderson. But Malcolm Brown seems like the guy going forward is who you want. He's going to be one of my top waiver wire claims for this week. I like guys who are going to get the ball. And I know, it's not going to be forever. I know, they're grooming Cam Akers to be that guy to take over the starting position. But I think Malcolm Brown, for the weeks that you could have him, could give you a lot of benefit. It's one of those things where he looked like the better running back, throughout the game. He just looked better than Akers and Henderson. So if he's on your waiver wire, I would try to put a claim for him. And then Robert Woods, he looked good he looked good tonight. He had 6 receptions for 105 yards. He was a clear leader of on the receiving end of the ball with the Rams. And then on the Dallas side of the ball, Zeke had a good game. He had a touchdown. He had 1 called back, but Zeke ran the ball, pretty well. He looked like Zeke of old. Last year he looked kind of sluggish, but this year he looks pretty good. And then surprisingly, Amari Cooper had a good game. I know people are calling me a Amari Cooper hater, but I just go based on stats, and the stats show that every time he goes against a top corner, he doesn't have good games, and when they play on the road, they don't have good games. Dak Prescott has, an issue with trying to play well against, he doesn't play well against top defenses, and, he didn't really he had a decent game, but not a game that you would, feel confident about, based on just, there's a lot of missed opportunities. He did have a couple touchdowns called back. He did have a rushing touchdown called back. Zeke had a touchdown that got called back based on his knee going down right before the goal line. But Amari Cooper, man, he had 10 receptions on 14 targets, and I think he had 80-something yards receiving. So I think he was definitely involved. I don't think it's ever the question about him being involved in the offense. I think it's just a question of who's he going against on the other side of the ball. And Jalen Ramsey was the guy that was guarding him, and he was on Cooper every single play, but to the point where Cooper had a good game. So it was encouraging to see Cooper play against a good defense and have the outing that he had. I mean, obviously it means more when you're in a PPR league, but just one of those things where it's just it's good to see Cooper be involved with so many targets. So that's it. That's everything about all the games and all my little notes about all the games that were on today. I'm going to move on to my studs of the week. A few of the players that I want to acknowledge for being the best of the best this week. And at the quarterback position, Russell Wilson was the number one quarterback for this week. He had 31.78 points. He, like I said, had a great game. He had 4 passing touchdowns. I mean, he had an 88% completion percentage. I mean, he just was on fire today. And along with Aaron Rodgers, Aaron had a very good game. I mean, he has 30.76 fantasy football points. I mean, he had 4 passing touchdowns. He looked pretty good. He looked like the old Aaron Rodgers that we are accustomed to seeing. So he had a very good game. And then at the running back position, Josh Jacobs was the number one running back this week. As we're recording this podcast on Sunday night, we don't know what's going to happen on Monday night. But as of right now, Josh Jacobs is the number one running back. He has 35.9 PPR points today, 3 touchdowns, and like I mentioned earlier, he had 4 receptions on 6 targets. And in that same game, Christian McCaffrey, he had a great game as well. He ended the game with 28.4 PPR points. So another game that you expect out of Christian McCaffrey. And then at wide receiver, Devontae Adams was the number one wide receiver this week. He had 41.6 PPR points. He had 14 receptions on 17 targets, 156 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So monster game for him. If he can stay healthy, this dude can be the number one wide receiver this year in fantasy. He's just that good. And then another guy that I was high on this year, had a very good game, was Calvin Ridley. He was the second best wide receiver this week. He had 33.9 PPR points. He had 9 receptions on 12 targets and 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's another guy that I feel like is the Chris Godwin of this year. He had a very good game coming out. So, honestly, the Seahawks defense, the pass defense is not what we are accustomed to. There are a team that just don't have the same players like they did when they had Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, but Calvin Ridley, I think, is going to take that next step this year. And then at tight end, I mentioned Dallas Goedert. He had, he led all tight ends with 24.1 fantasy points. He had 8 receptions on 9 targets with 101 yards and a touchdown. And then Mark Andrews, he had a great game. He had 5 receptions on 6 targets. He only had 58 yards, but he had two touchdowns. So it's one of those things that Mark Andrews pretty much started off like where he left off last year, with just being a dominant tight end that he was last year. So don't forget about Monday night. We've still got 2 games left. We have the Steelers versus Giants is the early game, and then the late game is the Tennessee Titans versus the Denver Broncos. So I hope for you guys that, what do you need to win this week? I mean, leave a comment below and let me know what you need to win, because I know for me in my main league, I am down by 16 points. And Dak Prescott, I was going against tonight, Dak Prescott and Cooper Kupp didn't have very good games, so it benefited me. But for that being the case, I still have Big Ben going. I have A.J. Brown. So as long as A.J. Brown and Big Ben get me more than 16 fantasy points, I win this week, which I'm excited about. So hopefully that happens. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening today. Please like, comment, and share this with people that you know. The next episode, like I said, I'll be discussing my waiver wire pickups for week 2. That will be dropping on Tuesday. So don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. You can find us on social media at Facebook and Twitter at The Gridiron Pod. You can find us on Instagram at The Gridiron Fantasy Football. So, like I said, that's it for today. Have a great day. Have a good night. And hopefully you guys win your fantasy weeks. And we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.